How does a late night Facebook scroll turn into a real career pivot? Welcome back to Sirius Talk, the Military Minute, the show where we amplify veteran and military spouse voices, share practical lessons learned, and spotlight proven resources that help people navigate transition and build meaningful careers. I'm Greg Banks, your host, and I want to thank you for being here today. Today's guest is Joanah Gacuya. Joanah is a military spouse who found her way into the Salesforce ecosystem after seeing another spouse share her career transition story online. She set a goal to enter a fellowship, rebuilt her resume with support, earned her first Salesforce certification, and pursued hands-on experience through volunteering while she waited for her internship to begin. In this episode, you'll hear how Joanah approached the challenge of getting started without prior Salesforce experience, what she learned about translating business processes into technical requirements, and why data in, data out becomes a very practical way she frames discovery and asks better questions with her clients. Let's get into it. Joanah Gacuya, good morning. Great to have you on Sirius Talk, the Military Minute. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Good morning.
Good deal. I think you were one of the first people I had on my list because when we used to interview HOH candidates, you and I got teamed up a couple of times, and I just that was the only time I'd worked around you. And I'm like, I got to get her on my short list of military spouses to talk to. But great to finally have you on here. Good to have
you here. Of course.
All right, so we've got kind of a plan laid out of some things we'll talk about today. But one thing I always like to do before we get into if you're a service member, a military spouse, before you find yourself in that place, there was a Joanah before marrying into that life. So talk a little bit about your childhood or whatever, just something about you prior to finding yourself in that military spouse space.
Yeah, sure. So let's start from the beginning. So I grew up in the Philippines. My whole family migrated to the US about 20 years ago. So during that time, so my dad, mom, and my sister, they left all at the same time. But I had to stay behind because I was like a semester away from finishing my bachelor's degree in psychology. So stayed back for a few months, graduated, and then I eventually joined them to the States. And so I feel like that was my first time traveling outside the country by myself. So it was quite an experience. So, and moving to a different country, it's a big adjustment, right? It's like new location, new place, new culture, food, everything. So I was thinking, it kind of like threw me off the loop when it comes to my career, because I'm like, should I pursue a higher education or should I get that first job experience? So because at that time, like I'm fresh out of college, have never worked before. Just, I've been in school my whole life. And we knew, like, when we were kids, we already knew that we're moving to the States. We just didn't know when. There was a point where it kind of threw me off the loop when it comes to my career, because I'm like, if you asked me back then, what do you want to be? I wanted to be a psychiatrist. So after college, I'm planning to, take it, get my master's degree and then get eventually to a medical degree to eventually work at a hospital. But, life has different plans for me. So yeah, I remember my first job working at a call center. So we're not telemarketers, but we call houses, we call people to do surveys. So your judge or your performance lies on how many surveys you complete. So I feel like that was my first experience working or dealing with people and improving on that communication skills.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
I think you're the second person in the Salesforce space that I found out had a background in psychology. And in hindsight, it probably makes an awful lot of sense. You do work with a lot of different personalities and whatnot, but did not know that about you. Good to hear. And when you first said you were left behind, I had no idea how old you were. I'm like, what? So
yeah,
I've heard people like being 10 or 12 and like staying back with family until the family gets established wherever they're going, stuff like that. So, wow. Okay. That's an interesting place to start.
Yeah.
So did you, after you finished, you graduated in your bachelor's, you went ahead and came onto the States?
Yes. Yeah, that's what I did. Great. So held different jobs. There's a point where I've been working two jobs, like an office job during the weekdays, and then weekends I work at a bookstore. That was one of my favorite jobs. Like I love reading books, so I had a blast. But yeah, I feel like, but with every job that I held, I feel like it always involves customer service. So going into Salesforce, I think I've built on that skills from my past experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of empathy and listening. I think especially in consulting, but even if you weren't consulting, when I got started, I was just an architect inside of a company working for my own company. but you're still, at the end of the day, those people are your customers. You still have to learn to listen and negotiate and all those things. So yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like your educational background really came in handy. Good deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fast forward a little bit. At some point, you meet your spouse, uh, get married. Were y'all did y'all meet wherever your parents were living? Had you relocated at that point? Tell me a little bit about how that started.
Actually, interesting how we met because we were in the same school in grade school. So I think I've known him from 5th grade. And then we reconnected when we were both in the States. But my husband, he moved to the States when he was 9 years old. So he moved after we graduated elementary. So I already knew that he left the Philippines. But yeah, it was just funny like how we met,
Wow.
reconnected, got married, and then yeah, that's my first venture of the military life.
What are the odds to be on both sides of the planet and wind up in
Yeah.
the same city? Fantastic. Good deal. All right. So you married a service member. Was he already enlisted when you reconnected here in the
Yeah.
States?
I think he has been in for like 5 years because he joined after high school. So yeah, and then we got
Okay.
our very first military orders to Japan. You know that I told you we moved from the Philippines to the States, and then I'm going to be moving to Japan. So we were there for 3 years. So another relocation, adjustment, another, culture, food. The food is the best, I would say.
Yeah, the food's there incredible.
Yeah, and that's where we had my firstborn son. Yeah, lots of good memories in Japan. In Japan is also where I held my financial services job, so I was able to work on base as a bank teller or a member service representative, as they call it, at a credit union. So again, like dealing with people, helping with their accounts, and loans, and
Okay. Yeah, and you did mention financial services, but I had not timeline wise, I didn't know where that was. So that was there. It was a lot of times you start out young in life, you get your first deployment, you wind up in a town where there's not much to
yeah,
choose from by way of employment, but it sounds like you had an opportunity to stay plugged in, keep working,
yeah.
get some more not education, but more experience with it. So, all right, what led you into Salesforce? So obviously there was a timeline between you're in Japan doing that, you wind up back in the States. Were you back here before you learned about Salesforce? How did you find your way onto that trail?
Yeah, we were already stationed in New York, which I'm still in New York at this point in time. Nobody told me about Salesforce. It was very random, but it came at a point in my life where I was looking to jumpstart my career. So before Salesforce, I stayed home. So I'm a stay-at-home mom for 3 years, and at that time, we knew that my husband's retirement is coming up, but he's still in the service. That's for another session. But during that time, I was like, I think naturally I'm a contributor. So I've always think of ways to contribute to the family. So I'm thinking I need to jumpstart my career so that way I can get our family prepared for when my husband transitions out of the military into retirement. So at first I thought I actually enrolled in college because I was thinking like I probably need to go back to school then find a job, after graduating. There but then we found out that there's a possibility that we're moving. So I'm like, maybe school is not a good time. And then at that time too, my youngest son was like 3 years old, so he's still a toddler. There was a lot of things going on around me at that time.
Right.
So one night I was scrolling through Facebook, and I'm part of this military group that tells you about online careers or transitioning from one career to another. And I saw a post of a military spouse talking about her transition to Salesforce. So back then, I didn't know what Salesforce was, but somehow I got drew into that post that I went into rabbit holes of researching what Salesforce is, watched so many YouTube videos about people's essentially testimonials of transitioning. Uh, but yeah, that's how I went about it. And then I found out about the hiring our heroes. And then, so from then on, my goal is to get into the next cohort or fellowship. So I prepared for my application. My resume is like dead because, I stayed home for 3 years, but I was grateful to find Hire Heroes USA. And they helped me with my resume. All I did was tell them, like, okay, I'm going to be applying for a Salesforce admin position. Can you tailor my resume to that job application?
Okay,
So
and
yeah.
you've been here, what, a little over 4 years, right?
Yes.
So I was trying
Yeah,
I was
I
trying to
start
figure out timeline wise. I was thinking back,
yeah.
hiring our heroes and kind of what their requirements and all look like back then. How you how you went about going to getting your admin cert, stuff like that. Like that, it's Trailhead existed, obviously, but getting that
Yeah.
and actually translating that into a place you could apply and word things properly, whatever.
Mhm.
So you had a couple of resources in your bag with Hiring Our Heroes and Hire Heroes USA. But okay, I just wanted to make sure we connected the timeline there because obviously that
Yeah.
program has changed a lot over the last 5 years. So
Yeah. And then the first requirement of the program is a sales, at least one, or even the Salesforce admin cert. So as I work on my application, I was also studying for my very first, Salesforce certification. So I really want to get into that fellowship. And then as I don't know anything about Salesforce and I heard the program back then was competitive. So I was like, I need to get some hands-on experience. So I went into the Salesforce military trailhead, and we have, those threads where I reached out to one of the military spouses to ask if she can give me a volunteer experience, and she did. So I was volunteering while waiting for the fellowship to start. So it was like a nonprofit org that we're working on.
So dig
So
into
yeah.
that a little bit because nobody we've talked to, we've had a lot of people talk about Salesforce military. I don't think people realize, and volunteers, people, I got to work for free. Like, I don't know that resonates with a
Yeah,
lot of people, but in something like this, when you go from nothing to being an admin, like that's a much bigger mental gap than one would think it is. So
exactly.
volunteering is a great way to kind of go risk free and get some experience. So talk a little bit about that. We haven't heard anything about that yet.
So, yeah, so that volunteer experience is just an initiative from military spouses where they're running like a Salesforce org for the Navy, for one of the ships in the Navy. There were a couple of us that were volunteers. So we go into this thing, Asana. It's like a project management app or board where you can pick up some tasks. And then from those tasks, let's say build a quick action or build some fields. So you pick up, because you're a volunteer, you're not really committed to like, okay, you need to do 4 hours, 5 hours here and there. So I just pick up whatever I can to get that experience. And then, once you complete, you just move the status to complete with whatever task you were working on. And sometimes we do have huddles, like if you have questions. I would say, yeah, it really helped me, especially going into the hiring our heroes, or the host company's interviews, because I was able to speak to a little bit about what I know so far and what I think I can do, for the company.
Yeah, I mean, not Trailhead is a remarkable thing. When I came around, it didn't exist, and arguably, I can't think of any other industry where you go into it and there's free training for anybody who wants to learn about it, like actual legitimate and certification that goes with that. Yeah, you have to pay for the cert, but in terms of having some credibility, to your point, to go sit down in your first interview, which you already talked about being home for several years or whatever, like whatever nervousness would have come, you can actually, with confidence and truth, say, I've got some actual practical experience. It may be made up stuff, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, you can say, yeah, somebody says, where would you go and set up to, do a case assignment rule or
Mhm.
something like that? Like things like that, you're gonna know. And Trailhead's not necessarily gonna teach you all of that. So learning to apply some of that is really, really useful. So good to hear. Good to hear. And how long did that go on?
So the volunteer, right? The timeline, June was the deadline of the application, and then August is when we start the internship. So I was like volunteering within that time frame until
Okay,
I
a couple of
started my
months. Okay.
internship. Yep, a couple months.
Good deal. Good deal. So talk about your internship a little bit. Is that what connected you to Sirius?
Yeah, so I was fortunately matched with Sirius. I interviewed with several companies, but Sirius was my number one. I think what drew me into Sirius is their pod model, where you work with the same people, like, because this is all new to me. So having that rapport or working relationship with the same people, I feel like will be really helpful, especially as I transition and get my like foot in the door in my first Salesforce job. Yeah, the internship was really valuable to me. When I joined my team, they didn't treat me like an intern. So I was part of everything. So I was in client meetings, I was hands on, getting my hands dirty with configuration. But yeah, and at that time, I felt like, okay, I think I got this. I understand the technical stuff. But I feel like looking back, the thing that I didn't prepare for was understanding the business process, because I feel like that comes with time. So I remember one of my first questions was, how do you write a user story? Or what is an acceptance criteria? Like, sure, I read that in Trailhead, but I haven't done it myself. So that ability to translate the business process from, like, say, coming from a discovery session to translating that into like technical requirements, it's really one of the biggest learning curves that I had because I haven't been exposed to how the business acumen, how enterprise companies work until, I get the chance to work in actual
Yeah.
projects. Yeah.
And I would argue that writing business requirements is probably one of the hardest things that you can go take all the trailhead you want. But if you have no practical experience in your background working in a business, if you've never sat in a sales meeting, if you've never dealt with quotes, if you've never done that as a user, it's really difficult to sit with a client because at the end of the day, it's like learning a new language every day, right? You're going to hear
Yeah.
words and context and all kinds of things, none of which really relate in your head other than it's a sentence that they said. And you're trying to
Mhm.
listen, write some things down. This was before AI, before you were recording all our meetings and getting
Yes. Now it's much
transcriptions.
easier.
So is your going through that process, and then you're also trying to apply this thing you're hearing, which you don't know, and turn it into a user story in a system you're just getting to know. Right. I mean, this is like gaining vision for the first time and going out on a road trip, right? You're trying to take everything in and be
Mhm.
useful at the same time. So what was some of the emotions or feelings you had, if you remember those first, I don't know, say 6 months of your fellowship? You come on, you're in a meeting and at some point you're going to step up. You're the one that's going to have to lead the call. Do you remember kind of some of the feelings you had going into that?
Yeah, there's a lot of mental gymnastics going on when it comes to like, am I contributing enough? Oh, I didn't say anything, or did I say some things right? A lot of times I was just observing, like observing how they ask questions. And I was fortunate enough to have a good mentor back then, my senior consultant. She was there to answer a lot of my questions. And then I remember some of the first questions I asked her was, how do you know how to ask the right questions? Because I was amazed at how she was able to drive the conversation and to take the information that we need from the client.
Yeah.
So that was, one of the first things that I've worked on to be able to have not just be a fly on the wall, but contribute to something. And like what I said earlier, it was like a big learning curve for sure.
Yeah, I think back to when I first got involved with Salesforce, we'd hired a company to come help us implement. And I remember watching them do exactly what you're talking about. And you just feel like you missed 10 meetings, right? Like you feel like this thing's been going on for months and you came in late. It's like, how do you know that? How in the world are you supposed to hear that? So that you say you worked on that. I've got some intuition about what you're going to say here, but what were some tactical things that you did to help overcome that work, to get yourself to a place where you felt like I've got something useful to ask or say or contribute here? Like what was the number one thing that you recall in the first, say, year where you felt like, yep, I've turned the corner on this? What did you tactically do to help overcome that?
I think it was an advice from my senior consultant, which is my mentor. Um, she said, like, so when I asked her, like, how do you ask the right questions? And she said, always think about how the data flows, how the data goes in and how the data goes out. And from that thinking, that's how I frame my questions from then on. Like, think of the end to end process. It starts with a lead and then it ends with like a done deal or a closed won deal, right? So it really helped a lot when you would kind of frame your mind to that thinking. So you're when you get into like a discovery session, you're not all over the place when it comes to asking questions. So even now, when I lead meetings or discovery sessions, whenever we start a project, I always like order my questions into like, let's start from the beginning and then how do we get this to the finish line?
Fair enough. Yeah, I worked with a
Yeah.
guy 15 years ago, and this had nothing to do with Salesforce. This guy was
Mhm.
certified in process design. And this is back in the day before when everybody was still in person in meeting rooms and whatnot. And we both worked for the same company that we were doing work for. And you'd walk, every conference room we went in had like these 16-foot whiteboards. And it doesn't matter who, I mean, it'd be the CEO of a multi-billion dollar company. It didn't matter who was in the room. He would get up, grab a marker, walk to the board, draw a box, and have lines coming on the left and lines coming on the right. And your average business person is going, why is he doodling? What is this for? And he would go, all right, we're here to talk about blank, whatever your process is, quoting, selling, whatever. He would write that in the box and he'd go, all right, before it gets here, where does it come from? What are your inputs? right? And then it comes in and you do magical things inside this box and then it goes somewhere else, right? Yeah. And it was just a way that any business person in a room, that the hardest thing is closing that gap between what you as a really technical person are thinking and trying to get to and what a business person who knows nothing technical usually, how do you get to a vocabulary where you can understand that? And this guy just had a way of cutting through that. And I would say that applies to almost any technical job, right? You can be in engineering or mechanics or in a lab in science, whatever, like putting stuff in, mixing stuff up, chemical, same thing, inputs, process, outputs. So great. And I'm sure during this time you're continuing, you're 11 times certified. It's a curse this time of year when all the cert reminders come up that you got to go maintain, but
Yeah.
11 certifications. So you're getting those, you're actually getting more technical, practical knowledge, but you're also applying those real time. I assume some of the earlier certs you got to speak to things here at Sirius in our pod model, we specialize in field service and CPQ. You've been on the CPQ team, I think, since you got here. So I'm assuming you're pursuing either like basic sales cloud and basic CP. I don't think CPQ is even a cert back then. It was like a super badge or something, right? But you're
No.
learning those things. That's how you're learning some of that, right?
Yes. So the way I get my certs is like, I always think like, am I going to use this? Because if you like what they like, you use it or lose it. So I only take certs that make sense to what I'm
Right.
doing. So if you see my profile, a lot of my certs will be related to revenue cloud, billing, CPQ, because that's what I do all day, every day. But yeah, certs do help a lot when it comes to just, learning how to implement something. But of course, it's a lot more than that when you're working on a project. Soft skills come into play. Yeah, your past experiences can also come into play.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's ground in that a little bit. You mentioned soft skills. That's one that I always like to bring up. You had in some of the earlier intro questions talked about doing those surveys and working in the financial industry and learning to talk to people, things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can go on Trailhead and just practice and do these things. Those are going to learn your skills, these technical things you've got to set up. But what are some things that that you leverage today that really are meaningful to your job? It had nothing to do with anything you did in Trailhead. Like when you say soft skills, be specific there. What are some things that you
Yeah,
use
I
every
mean,
day that help you work with a client?
first of all, yeah, communication is very, very important, along with, listening, having that empathy to understand what they're going through, or, what the real problem is and how you can help solve it and make a difference. It really comes into play like when you're working with clients, having that open communication, calling out things early on when like let's say there's a risk in like a timeline or a budget, or if you can't, let's say some things are not feasible, like, those call outs, like that's why I said communication comes into play when it comes to like working with clients. And also, with communication, you can uncover like what the needs are, can ask like why, how they're doing things. So if you have experience in like dealing with people, you'll be able to communicate effectively, I would say. So I feel like that's one of the number one skills.
And I haven't thought a whole lot about this outside of consulting, but I think even if you're inside your own company doing this work, in the beginning, you don't have familiarity, you don't have trust
Mhm.
with your customer, whether
Yeah.
that customer is internal or external. So you got to work really hard to establish that early. And that could be very little things. And this is, I think, the soft skills. So hard skills are I'm actually taking what they're saying and maybe I'm putting it in a lucid, I'm writing a user story, I'm defining
Yeah.
acceptance criteria. A soft skill is taking those user stories back to that client as soon as you possibly can from discovery and saying, "Here's what I heard you say. Are we right?" So they just heard compassion. They're not just taking my money and assuming everything and going to do whatever they want to do. They actually care that they're getting it right. And you start closing that emotional gap because these things are emotional. They're hard. And at the end of the day, every single business person that comes into a meeting, that's not their primary job, right? They have a
Yeah.
day job, but all of a sudden they've been thrown on this project. So you're taking time out of their workday and they need to know that you're compassionate and are finding that time useful and meaningful. So when you can close that gap, those people skills go a long, long ways. Again, we want to help people through this podcast think through their life experience, just things they've done. And it doesn't have to be employment, right? It could be working in
Yeah.
a school. It could be volunteering, whatever those things are. These are actual practical skills that translate to very valuable things, even in the tech space. So I just don't want people to overlook that. Good deal. So we'll talk a little bit about your journey through your time here at Sirius, but talk a little bit about your passions. I think there's, and I'm as guilty as anybody. You look out at this technical space, and it's just a bunch of nerds who have nothing better to do than technical things, and they get off work and they go to Trailhead, and they have test orgs at home. I remember interviewing a fellow who wrote an app because she liked running, so she built an app in Salesforce to track her runs.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Like, I nerd out on my grocery list, so we all have our little synchronicities. But talk a little bit about your passions beyond Salesforce.
So it's a given that I'm in Salesforce, so I like figuring things out. Just don't let me install like a furniture. That's my husband's job. But I leave it to him. I really like exploring the world. I guess that's what drives me. Like I like going for an adventure with my kids. Like we like going, museums or landmarks. I also like in terms of like our home, I like designing our home. And also, I'm one of the people who like on TikTok or Instagram just viewing recipes. I like trying, a viral recipe here or a dessert. I've also tried, or I'm also doing gardening. Like during the summer, like we always have. I like growing things from like a seed to like a flower and a flower. Yeah, so those things, like that's what keeps me going.
Do you have a lot of organic roots outside of work? Fantastic. I did that last
Yeah,
year. We've had a garden, I don't know how many years,
yeah,
but we'd always go to the big box store and grab a plant and plant it. Uh, the problem is I don't remember till March that I should do this, and I'm like a month late already. So I had to go out and get the soil out and plant the seeds and all that, and it didn't turn out as good as I hoped. Like, the plants came up great, but once we translated them to the garden, they didn't do so well. So we're back to buying
yeah.
plants this year, but I always like to hear about those interests. Good deal. You mentioned y'all are in New York. Is any of your other family in New York or close by? Do you get to see the rest of your family very often?
Not very often. So my parents, we don't have a family in New York, in short, but my parents are in New Mexico, and then my sister is in North Carolina right now. They're also in the military. My brother-in-law is in the army, so they move all over too.
Not
But
too
yeah,
terribly far, but they also don't have the freedom just to get away and go spend 4 days in the car, right? Driving up and
yeah,
back.
yeah, yeah,
Good
yeah.
deal.
My nephew was
Okay.
here in the summer, so get to see.
That's one of the things that Hannah Pearsall, who was our very first guest, she was the very first fellow that I mentored here.
Yeah,
And I remember when her husband was able to get out of the Navy, and they were able to relocate back home to family and go to Christmas with their family at Christmas. And as again, just things that in my mind had not really registered. Like, you thinking about veterans being away from their family at Christmas, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
But to go a step further and think about the family and know the spouse, and if you've got kids, all those things, like, it's a really important part of the transition. Is not just getting free from the military, but it's also reintegrating to your family. Where do you wind up living after you get out? Do you have any connections in that town to go to? Your parents live in a town where the type of job you do exists. And that's where technical jobs, I think, in this day and age, post COVID, where so many things are and can be, maybe are even better done remote. It really opens the door for a lot of opportunities. Looking back, so you got here, did you actually start in 2019 or 2020? Am I getting that years right?
2021,
Doing my math right? Okay, 21.
2021. Mm-hmm.
So a little over 4 years, almost five. Sirius has changed a lot during that time. I got here early in 2022, and I know a lot has changed. Looking back over your time here, how would you summarize that, just in terms of growth and reflecting back? Like, maybe you like the idea of the pod model coming in, but now you're actually in it. You're leading a pod. What does that experience mean to you?
It's really a lot to me. There's a lot of growth that comes with it. Until now, you learn things every day, but getting to work with my team has really been an awesome experience, like especially like finishing a successful project together, seeing and not just, finishing a project, but making that difference when you find out like the solution you built is still being used and you've worked together to accomplish that is really satisfying, and what this really sums up what we do here at Sirius. I think I would say I'm very fortunate enough, like coming into Sirius, I've worked with a lot of new implementation projects. So being a new person in this industry where you're just learning things. So I get that chance to design and build a brand new org And that I think that's what kickstart for me, like my understanding of the system, like how you build it from start to finish with nothing, from nothing to, having a Salesforce environment was really, really helpful when it comes to like thinking back of all the projects I've worked on. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I think coming into an org that already exists is a lot
Mm,
harder, because you
yeah,
just don't know what was done before you got
100%.
there. So even if you do everything right, if somebody ahead of you did something that you assumed was right and it turned out not to be, it
Yeah.
winds up being a real problems. Yeah, and I would echo the same sentiment. The concept of team is so important. We do a lot, even though we're a full-time remote company, we do an awful lot to try and keep the team tight, to keep the company small, to stay connected with one another. But the pride that you have of meeting a client, going through the really awkward, it's like dating, right? The really
Yeah.
awkward get to know them kind of phase, and then building a trust, working on those comms, getting that first demo out, setting up UAT, helping somebody to understand what does it mean to run a test script. 95% of most business people who've not been through a project like this have no idea what that is. What do I need to do? How far do I need to go? Is this really a priority of all the other things I got to do? There's a lot that goes into that. So when you're able to navigate all those unknowns with a client and help them get to that finish line, you're right. It's very, very gratifying. And I would think just hearing your journey to go from showing up in your first call, trying to contribute, writing your first user story, going through some of your first setup, maybe even doing your first demo. Like to me, that's really when the rubber hits the road is, "Ooh, I said that right and it worked and it didn't blow up in front of the client." Like that, maybe that's not what most people think consultants think about, but nobody's born a consultant, right? You got to work up to that place. So the nature of our pod, from an architect to a senior to a consultant to an associate, there's a hierarchy of those things. And how much line do we give you to run out on? Do we trust you to do certain things? But it's great for building your confidence. And I think that comes through in spades. So I
Yeah.
polled some of your current and past teammates just to talk about their time working with Joanna.
Okay.
The first one I got is, in 3 words, she's reliable, intelligent, and kind. This is shown in her internal communication and her external consulting work. So I think this highlights some of the things you talked about that you're intentional with. Joanna is someone who can read help documentation and remember it and then relay it in a user-friendly way. She has incredible tenacity to figure things out. She is my chat GPT. I'll let you
I
guess
don't
who
know who
said these
said that.
things. Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I know, yeah, I know
The
who said
last
that.
one, her episode will drop next week. Joanna is a true success story in the Salesforce consulting industry. From her start as a HOH fellow, she has grown tremendously within the space of a few years to become a true expert in Revenue Cloud and is able to step in front of a large audience and field difficult technical questions with little preparation. This speaks to the depth of knowledge and experience she's built over the course of time with Sirius. Finally, Joanna's mentorship and leadership abilities have grown equally, which can be heard in the words of her grateful colleagues. And I got to echo that one. I did not witness all of that firsthand, but I recall being here and going through 2 or 3 fellowships. And I knew like every fellow had a mentor, if you will, a boss, so to speak. They would wind up on a pod, and that usually was the engagement manager. What I did not really understand so much in the beginning was they also had like an HOH alum mentor. And in many, many cases, that was you. And I heard that firsthand from several of the fellows that I mentored, just how much they love talking to you, that they're never scared to come ask that
Oh, that's
question.
good.
You have to create that
Yeah.
environment. That's part of the fellowship, but they were never scared to come to you because the compassion you brought, even to them. Compassion is not just an external put it on because the customer's here kind of a face. Like you do a really good job internally of making people feel the same thing, which
Thank
is
you.
really, really important. So I appreciate the work you do there. And I echo that. This is a hard job. And if we don't do all we can to make it enjoyable, it's like you're going to have a constant turnover of people. So
Exactly, yeah.
you mentioned growth, and this is something like I look around at people like Frank, who, but I don't have, was he up 28, 29, 30 certs now? I have no idea where he's at. Um, the fact of the matter is you never arrive, right? You can learn things and nail certain things down, but this train is moving and there's always, I'm like, AI disrupted nobody knew anything about AI a year ago, or very little, and it's changing every 7 minutes. As
Yeah.
you look back over 2025, we're getting towards the end of the year. All our recaps are coming in from Spotify and whatnot.
Yeah.
What would you put at the top of your learning tree this year? What's one lesson, whether that's a Salesforce lesson or something else?
Like, like what you mentioned, AI is like on the top of my list. There is a point this year where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't keep up with all these AI tools, but anything that will make me more productive, I'm all in. So I got to learn that. And of course, as a person who's specializing in Revenue Cloud, being that RCA or Revenue Cloud Advanced is also an upcoming, CPQ software. So that's also that will never go out of my list of, learning and, growing into.
Yeah, the ocean of acronyms, they never stop, do they?
Yeah, I think it changed
So,
already, but
no doubt,
yeah.
no doubt. Yeah, if you don't like it, just hang out a few minutes. They're gonna rename it, rebrand it,
Yeah.
stick it up under something else. So, if a military spouse reached out to you, like you've been on this journey for a minute now, if one reached out to you, what encouragement or resource would you recommend to them? How would you recommend them
Yeah.
if they were looking to go from stay at home, whatever, maybe they're a mom, maybe they're not. They haven't had gainful employment for several years and they're looking to come down an own route. Would you recommend Salesforce or consulting as that? What are some things you would recommend?
I would say, first of all, just a little advice, like as a military spouse, everybody knows it's not easy. It's quite a journey from different moves, changes, military orders, adjustments, and all that. So I would just say give yourself grace. You're already doing it. And Salesforce is one of the only avenues where you can apply what you already have to your careers. I would say having that adaptability and resilience within you will really take you to places. So even if you think like we think like, okay, wow, Salesforce is technical, I don't have any technical experience. You don't discount or don't disqualify yourself right away. A lot goes into it. It's not just the technical skills, like what we said, soft skills, your personality. Like it's just the perfect recipe for a good consultant or a good career path your way. And then there are a lot of resources out there. One of the things that I really liked about this career path is the amount of support that you get from people that has been in the ecosystem for years. A lot of people are willing to mentor, share their experiences, give advice, and even, from resume building to just, listening to you and, sharing those success stories is, really helpful and really motivating from a person that's just coming in to this industry. For resources, I would say hiring your heroes is still there. It's a different structure now, but they still help veterans, spouses, active duty service members transition into meaningful careers. And then Hire Heroes USA is also my number two. If you need help building your resume, reach out to them. Back then, I also had mentor through Veterati, but I feel like it's different now. I think they don't have it anymore. But if you can find something similar, having a mentor is really helpful too.
Yeah, somebody pinged me last week that Veterati was coming back.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I went down the wormhole looking at posts to see on LinkedIn or anywhere else had they kind of announced, and there was a little bit. I didn't see a whole lot, so maybe it's happening, but they haven't really socialized what's going there. But yeah, mentorship is a great thing. I think so often, whether it's a service member or a spouse, you're doing life, right? You're in the Army,
Mm,
you're in the Navy, you're in the Marines, or you're a spouse with somebody doing those things. So that's where you're at, and where there is. Like, you don't know what that is. What will that job be? Where
yeah.
will that job be?
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And sometimes it's just need help talking through what is civilian life like. Most people who go in the service go right out of high school. So the last job they had was at 7-Eleven or or
Yeah.
McDonald's or something. They don't have meaningful employment per se. They come out of the military. So now you're, at minimum 22, maybe you're 28, 30, 35, whatever, if you've spent a lot of time in there, and you're going to find yourself in your first civilian interview, or your first day. And we talk about the term imposter syndrome here an awful lot. But I want to kind of capitalize on something you just said. Another term we hear a lot. Tom House mentioned this. He's the director of Salesforce Military. He mentioned this: the accidental admins.
Yeah.
And people may hear us utter that phrase. I kind of wanted to take the time to define what it is. And that is, nobody who winds up being a Salesforce admin thought that's where they would wind up. I was in the banking industry in Y2K. And if you took typing in high school, then you were the admin of the bank. Like you could type commands on the server and not shut it down or whatever. Like it takes so little to get into it. It just takes a little bit of compassion and passion to learn to get
Mhm.
on this road. And once you do, right, you're not hopping on and off a train. You're on the train that's moving and you're just kind of choosing which part of it you like. If you like talking to people, maybe you want to be a BA. Maybe you want to be an architect. If you don't
Mhm.
like talking to people, you can go the dev route or be just a consultant that sits behind the scenes doing config. If you love sales, maybe you go into marketing. If you just nerd out on numbers, maybe you set up Revenue Cloud. There's so many different ways
Yeah.
to do this. And that's probably not limited to the Salesforce space, but just those examples of like nobody went to school to do Revenue Cloud. Nobody.
Yeah.
Right. But you find yourself in this space and you go, hey, there's an interest here. I want to learn something that's valuable. People need this. What's the number one thing that hurts company sales is onboarding salespeople. How do they teach them how to quote? With a
Mm.
really good quoting tool, you don't have to do that, right? You just teach them to ask questions. They fill them in and all the magic of what used to be between people's ears, you build that into the program itself. So now it's recommending the right products and if you get one of these, you need three of those and two of them. All that can be built into it. So if you just really like enhancing somebody's work experience, but you don't want to be a rat in the wheel out just selling stuff. You want to actually feel like you make a difference every day. Consulting is a great, great way to do that. Those are great resources. We'll definitely put links to those in the show notes. You mentioned one other thing and you talked about volunteering. Elaborate on that and then talk about that maybe back before you got into this side of things. And is that something you still do?
So, in terms of volunteering, I think I would say I still volunteer, but outside of work, not really related to Salesforce. But I feel like there will probably through the Salesforce military, maybe there are still companies giving that opportunity. And I would say it might be connected to hiring your heroes as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I know ACP is another organization that really
Oh, yeah.
focuses on the mentorship side of things, and it's a year-long mentorship. I just recorded an episode, it'll release in a few weeks, and so many people, I think particularly civilians, maybe have a passion to help out the military or help people on this journey, but like, what do I know? What can I possibly
Yeah.
offer? And I had the same question. Like when they matched me with the candidate that I mentor, I've been mentoring for 7 months now. He's 33-year Air Force. Like, what? I'm
Oh,
not qualified to
it's
talk
a
to
long
this
time.
guy. And I'm like, but I got to thinking, he and I are about the same age. I'm like, I've got 33 years in the civilian world that he doesn't have. So from that perspective, I'm exactly who he needed. Like when he and I both when he entered the military and I entered the workforce, the internet didn't exist. Cloud
Yeah.
services didn't exist. AI certainly didn't exist. So he and I have just kind of talked through navigating that. So yeah, we want to promote these resources. We want to tell the stories of people that are finding these and that's helping them along their journey and just remind people they can be successful. But to anybody who's not a spouse, a military spouse or a service member that happens to listen to this, you can get involved too. Like there's great, great ways to plug in and read a resume. Maybe you're in HR somewhere and like you just know what you look for on resumes. You'd be a great resume coach. Or maybe you interview people. You'd be a great interview coach. Like what are the kinds of things? Eye contact, showing up early, sending a thank you note after the fact. All these things that are different about interviewing today than they were years ago. When I was in my early 20s, you put on a suit and walked in and sat in front of somebody and just sat there and sweat. Almost all of
Yeah.
it's virtual now. So it's just different. So again, like all those experiences that you can be in your 20s or your 60s. We have an accumulation of experiences that we can pass on to help people along this path. So I love the fact you're talking about volunteering. I think it's really, really important. Last one. The life of military spouses has plenty of challenges, no doubt. If someone came to you about your experience, how would you describe that? Like, just set Salesforce and maybe Sirius aside for a second. Like, just looking at your life 6, 7, 8 years ago to where it is today. How would you sum that up?
I think it's a life that's not without challenges. There's a lot of moving parts to it, a lot of resiliency, adaptability involved in that journey. But having a strong support system that backs me up every time, especially when I took the chance, to get into Salesforce, start a new career. It was really helpful to have a strong support system, like being my husband. Like he's always my biggest fan. His support meant a lot to me and as well as my family. So that all combined contributes to my success. And of course, like having good people that you work with is really, really valuable. when it comes to like even staying with this career for this whole while and, growing and improving yourself all throughout this journey. So yeah, I would say it's a wild ride that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
My dad was in the airlines industry, was a mechanic for a while, eventually wound up in engineering. But
Uh-huh.
that the culture of, the people that were working in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and maybe 90s, back then you would get on with a company, you worked 40 years, you'd get a pension, and you would retire from that company. Like, there was a lot to be said for just being loyal to
Hmm.
a company. But company
Yeah.
culture has changed. Some companies, like, the last thing you want to do is spend 40 years there, because after about 3, it's just they're milking you. They're just getting what they can out of you and giving you over. I think COVID did a lot of this. Like, a couple of recessions we've been through did this. Like, they would lay people off, so whoever was left had to pick up the slack, and then they go, "Oh, well, they can do 20% more work than they used to," and now that's just the norm.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I think you didn't directly say this, but where my mind went is sometimes it's not just picking a job, it's picking a company culture that you can relate to and finding people that you can work around.
Hmm.
Man, that goes an awful long way for mental
Goes a long
health
way.
and success. So great stuff. Joanna, thank you so much. I just love hearing military spouse stories because it's the other side. The military was always a place of passion for me, and really getting to Sirius and meeting the first 3 fellows I had were military spouses. And I just got to see a side of that picture that I never really got to see. So when I hear you guys
Yeah.
more about what you go through and how you navigate not just finding a job. Now I want to highlight these words, not just finding a job, but finding a career, a
Yeah.
meaningful
That you can
career
grow in.
that at
Yeah.
some point your husband chooses to get out, and you've done your part on the family to help carry that load and set the family up for success. So I appreciate what you do. I thank you for your family's service,
Okay. You're
and
welcome.
you who've popped around the planet.
Yeah.
You've seen a
Thank
lot
you.
of different cultures. I got to think your kids were great,
Thanks.
for having seen some of those cultures and stuff. But thank you for what your family does for our nation, and thank you for what you do here at
Thank you.
Sirius. Really great to get to know you a little better today.
Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right, have a
Greg.
great day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
If there's a core theme in today's conversation, it's this: you don't have to disqualify yourself early, and you don't have to do the transition alone. Joanna talked about adaptability and resilience, and she also got specific about the practical steps that helped her build momentum, getting support on her resume, studying for that first certification, and finding hands-on experience through volunteering while she waited for her internship to start. If today's conversation sparked something in you, take one action now. Follow or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And then share this episode with one veteran or military spouse who's trying to figure out what next looks like. If you've got an extra 30 seconds, leaving a review really helps more people find these stories and these resources. And remember, you'll find links and resources in the show notes, including Hiring Our Heroes, Hire Heroes USA, and the Salesforce Military Trailhead. Whatever stage of transition you're in, keep taking the next right step, one decision at a time. To every veteran and military spouse listening, thank you for what you carry and how you keep showing up for your families and your communities. Special thank you to Jason Fowler for allowing us to use his song Mystery Road. Until next time, this is Greg Banks, and thanks for coming along. We'll catch you at the next briefing.